Hello and welcome to the South Asian Trends. Afghanistan has once again gained attention from the international community after the Taliban returned to power. It has been more than 4 months since the Taliban successfully captured Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. To this day, Afghanistan still faces a variety of challenges under the leadership of the new government. My guest today is Irfan Yar. Irfan Yar is the founder and managing director of the Afghanistan Security Institute in Canada. He also is a lecturer and member of the advisory board at the Global Counter-Terrorism Institute in USA. His area of interest focused on Afghanistan, the Taliban, terrorism, and radicalism. He had frequently published many papers and had writing columns in many national and international outlets, including the News Times, the National Post, the Diplomat, and elsewhere. He recently published a book chapter on religions and terrorism in Afghanistan. Good morning and welcome to South Asian 10 Ifran. The floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Supavit. It's really great, to see you after a long time, and I thank South Asian Trends for inviting me to this prestigious platform. So, is our topic today is that what are the challenges to the Taliban regime in Afghanistan? I will briefly talk about, what are the internal and external challenges that the group facing these days. The lecture or presentation will last for around 20 minutes, and after that, if there were any question or comments, any up, you are free to ask. So let's start, from the most critical challenge that in my person the Taliban face is right now is the lack of trust. This issue has been undermined or maybe not has given credit as much as it deserves. If we see back in the 1994 when the 1996 when the Taliban took power, they ruled Afghanistan with an iron hand, and the regime imposed a very strict interpretation of Islamic law. They banned women from joining activities that were normal before them, especially before Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and they banned women from education, from other public activities. Minorities in Afghanistan also suffered to a great extent. The government was very much exclusive to one group, and public execution was very common. So this gave a very dark and brutal image of the Taliban, not only to Afghan but international community. And now that the Taliban has come to power once again, people still think of the Taliban as that barbarous regime. So because of that, they have lost their trust. And many people in Afghanistan, they do not want to work, they do not want to live in the country anymore. What they are trying to do is just to escape the country because they think that the Taliban will again, be very harsh on them. Even though the Taliban try, to include in their talking point, women rights, protecting them, human rights, and of course, general amnesty. But unfortunately, very less people trust them right now. So the trust that they should gain is still lacking, and this is, I think, the most important thing when you want to rule a country, because first you need to have your people trust in you, and once you get their trust, then they can cooperate. So and we shall also understand that for the last 20 years, media was with the enemies of the Taliban, international media and local media, and their enemies, by which I mean the previous Afghan government. They tried their best to portray even a darker image of the Taliban. If the Taliban were bad, they made it exaggerated and portraying them even a more evil regime. and that has left a strong watermark on the minds of many Afghan and foreign groups, because people do not know much of Afghanistan, especially the international audience. So what they do is they gain their information from the mass media. And of course, as I said, for the 20-year, the media portrayed even a more negative image of the Taliban, which has left in a strong imprint on the mind of people, saying that the Taliban are really really bad. Of course, we shall acknowledge that they are not the best, but they were exaggerated. So lack of trust is I think the key a challenge to the Taliban that they need to work on. And second is governance, running the government of Afghanistan. Previously, even though the government was not a very good one, people were very fed up with the previous government. It was absolutely a corrupt regime. Warlords were just sucking the bloods of poor Afghans. And there were so many other problems in that. Even the basic utilities of life, such as education, even access to water, hospital, or other basic healthcare was dream for most of Afghans. But uh, at the same time, people did not want the Taliban to come, even though they were fed up with the previous government, but they also did not want the Taliban. So, but now that the Taliban has took over Kabul, they find it even more difficult, to run the bureaucracy of Afghanistan, because most of the Afghan who were working in the government service, they fled the country. And people who are still in Afghanistan, they do not want to return back to work for many reasons. First, they have their psychological a problem toward the Taliban. Second, they say, well, if we go to work, who is going to pay for us? Because the Taliban these days are not paying to their people in Afghanistan because they have no money. Even the teachers, they are reluctant to go back to school because there are no money, a salary to be given to them. And this is a huge challenge for the Taliban. So the brain drain that is being created after the fall of Kabul is huge. And the Taliban per se has no capacity, even though there are some members of the Taliban, but who are very compatible and capable of they have higher education and etc., but the number is very small, and that cannot fill what is required in the Afghan government. They need people who are highly a technocrat, bureaucrat, and skilled. But that gap is still there because people in the previous government, they were brought in mostly from Western countries or the neighboring countries. They were well educated, and with the fall of Kabul, they went back to those countries. So that brain drain, is another challenge for the Taliban. And this is why the Taliban even call on people to come and serve their people by joining the government. But people are still very reluctant to join the Taliban. And I think most of them is because of also economic crisis. As I said, there is no money. So the government, the running of Afghanistan, or the governance is second, a key challenge that the Taliban need to address. Third, which has attracted a lot of atrocities, is the cabinet of or the structure of the Taliban government. Uh, if we compare the current government with the previous Afghan government, the previous Afghan government has more diverse cabinet, even though it has included a lot of corrupt leaders and warlords, but still it gave an image of diversity to international community especially. And personally, I believe that one of the good things that the Taliban did, that they did not give a place to the previous corrupt warlords. Even though the Taliban still need to work on its cabinet, because it is still very much inclusive. The Taliban need to diversify its ethnic representation. even though the Taliban said that they had given place to all ethnicities, but it's still very less. The Taliban need to work on that. But it does not mean that the Taliban should give place to, say, leaders like Dr. Abdullah or Hekmat Yar or some other warlords, because as I said, we people Afghanistan did not see any advantage or benefit from those people. They were just working for their self-interest. And we shall also understand that the definition of an inclusive government for the Taliban is not what we are the Western people see. Western people often see, if they included the previous warlord, that means that it will be an inclusive government. But the Taliban say no, we do not subscribe to this definition. For them, an inclusive government is to recruit every person from Afghanistan, irrespective of its color, its ethnicity, or language, difference, to the cabinet if they have the compatibility. So the Taliban said that they give more importance to talent, but unfortunately that is not the reality, because what in action we see is the Taliban have mostly recruited mullahs who do not really have talent. And then they will justify that claim that, well, since we give a lot of sacrifice, it was these mullahs who fought for freedom of Afghanistan, so they should be the one who will rule Afghanistan. And they said that it is normal in every government to have your own people on high level offices, but under that anybody can participate. So these are some of the justification that the Taliban provide. But overall, the Taliban cabinet has attracted a lot of criticism internally and externally. uh, Another key challenge that is really heartbreaking is the economic crisis, the humanitarian catastrophe that Afghanistan is going through. We must understand that Afghanistan, for centuries has been dependent on foreign aid. Previously it was Russia, then and even before that it was the Great Britain. And with the
Mm.
arrival of the US in Afghanistan, the US were pouring money into the Afghan government. But with the sudden fall of Kabul, the international aid suddenly dried up, and suddenly its effect were felt on the Afghan population. According to the UN agency World Food Program, more than 23 million of Afghans are suffering from acute hunger, and the number is rising day by day. People have no food on their table. They are suffering from harsh weather in the country. They have no clothes, no blanket, or the basic need that they can survive on. So and the unemployment rate has reached to its highest stage. Poverty is widespread. Money has suddenly just disappeared. The problem of liquidity or the cash. No more Afghanistan is printing money. A dollar has been stopped, and the currency of Afghan currency has fallen to the record
Mm.
lowest rate. So all this has a very negative impact on poor Afghan population. And at the same time, the Taliban have no access to their funds, which has been frozen by by the US. So, Bhavit, I'll just give me 1 second.
Okay.
All right, yeah, there was some problem. So all these things has created destabilization in Afghanistan. And of course we must not ignore the internally displaced people. And if this trend continued, there will be a lot more refugees into the neighboring countries and Europe because of the poverty problem in Afghanistan. So economic crisis in one of the key, challenges that the Taliban are facing. In the poppy cultivation RPM has also increased recently, according to the United Nations report. Uh, Compared to previous this year, there has been a reduction in the poppy cultivation, and I think this is mostly attributed to poverty because people have no other means of survival. So they will just going back to poppy cultivation, even though the Taliban tried that they will completely ban poppy cultivation, but it becomes natural. People will do their best to survive and they will go to any extent of illegal or legal activities to feed themselves and their children. And then, of course, we have, the security challenges. Even though the security has been improved overall, there is no more, regular warfare. The only, and I think the most alarming threat that the Taliban is facing now is from the ISIS-K, the Islamic State of Khorasan, which is a local branch of the Islamic State for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the neighboring region. And since the Taliban have took over the government of Afghanistan, they have escalated their terror campaign. Most of the high attacks were, I think not all of them were conducted by ISIS, and they say that the Taliban are a moderate group. They compromised with many countries, and they say that they can be the new representative of the so-called real Muslims. And even though they also say that the Uyghur Muslim, which is a small minority in Afghanistan, that they will represent them because the Taliban established are at least trying to have good relationship with China, and the Uyghur population there is now scared, so they are more likely to support, the IISK if they, hand over those minorities back to China, and ISISK exploit that situation. They say that we are your protective, force, and we can offer you protection if not the Taliban. And unfortunately, just like many other countries, ISK has started destabilizing the social fabric of Afghanistan by targeting minorities, especially the Shia minorities. Most of the attacks, are taking place over Hazara in Afghanistan, which is really, saddening. So this ISK threat is evolving, even though, as I say, it's still very early to respond to ISK because the number is very small. But given that in asymmetric warfare, anybody can achieve greater efficiency with limited resources, and so does the ISK. So if the Taliban are capable of containing them in this age, they can prevent a massacre in the future. And I think international community also have responsibility to contain ISIS, which is really a serious threat not only for Afghanistan but for the world. So the Thai people should be united against the common enemy at this point of time. And another challenge, that the Taliban are facing is the recognition of international community. The Taliban, craving for international recognition. So far, none of the government has recognized them, and they constantly, trying and call upon international community to recognize them. Before it was Pakistan, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia in 1990s who recognized the Taliban regime. But even those that have now refused, or at least did not acknowledge to recognize the Taliban regime, even though many countries still are in communication with the Taliban, but formally none of the country has recognized. And if you are not recognized, then you have no diplomatic relationship, and then it also affect your trade relationship, and of course, foreign aid. So the Taliban, are trying their best, to be recognized by international community, but international community have their own, demands and condition, to recognize the Taliban. And what they usually say that they do not, buy the Taliban uh, talks. They want to see what they do in action and reality. If the Taliban respect women rights, human rights, minority, and form an inclusive government, then maybe international community will recognize them. And so far, even though the Taliban tried to address those demands, for example, they allowed women to go to school. They, announced general amnesty, and they say they respect human rights, but international community says no, it is not enough, and it's still very early to recognize the Taliban. And we must understand that the United States, who has, a huge interest not only in Afghanistan but in that region, has lost its leverage on the Taliban. They have no more military presence in the country. The only leverage they have is the economic leverage, and the money which has been frozen by the United States is a huge, tool to mount pressure on the Taliban. But even though the pressure from international community can have its own advantage, which is to compel the Taliban to respect human rights and give more, empowerment to women. But unfortunately, it has its own side effects. For example, Afghan population will be suffering. So, what will be great for the international community to introduce smart sanction, and not just, to implement, blanket sanction, which can harm the population in general. So this is very challenging issue, not only for the Taliban but for our international community, how to deal with Afghanistan. And I feel that international community is confused because from one hand they want to help the people of Afghanistan who are suffering from poverty and hunger. On the other hand, they do not want to cooperate with the government. And we understand this, but unfortunately, if you do not cooperate with the government, you are, very less likely to properly implement your policies in that country, because there will be lack of cooperation, and you cannot distribute the aid, to the people who need them. So this cannot go hand in hand, and international community shall, speed up its efforts, in terms of engaging with the Taliban, so that they have a solution, for the people of Afghanistan and the catastrophe which is prevalent there. And this would be, my conclusion, that even though the Taliban face huge challenges, if it works with international community, and if the Taliban recognize women rights, minority, and human rights, and of course, respect the symbols of Afghanistan and try to win in hearts of the country and its people, they will be even more successful than their, predecessor or the previous Afghan government. But they have still, a lot to work on, and they should also, increase its efforts to cooperate with international community, so that they can find solution for the crisis of Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Irfan. Your analysis and your your uh, comment about this particular issue and the challenge of the Taliban in Afghanistan is enlightened a lot of my thinking and my thoughts now. For the listener, if you have any question, you can put on the comment in the Facebook, and I will read it to Irfan. And for me, I have some question that I got from my friends and many people. First of all, I want to asking you about what the Taliban dealing with the arms that or the weapon that the US left in the country, because it may bring to the armed trafficking from from the Afghanistan to other terrorist group in other regions. What is your opinion about this particular problem?
Well, that's really, a very, serious problem. The U.S. left a lot of arms, even though the Taliban claimed that almost all of the arms with them, but the Taliban do not have full control over its militants. Some of the militants can exploit and misuse the power or their, position, and there has been a lot of cases that those weapons were sold in the black market. And there are some reports that Pakistani agents are trying to buy those weapons so that they can maybe copy in Pakistan and see what technology the US were using. And of course, black markets always operate, and ISIS-K or the Islamic State, can easily have access to those weapons. So yeah, I'm worried about that gap until the Taliban have established strong control over its militants and over its country. Then this problem can be relatively easily solved.
Okay. And I think dealing with you talking about the Pakistan, some of our listeners just asking about this particular problem. They said like, since now the US had fully withdrawn from Afghanistan, do you think Pakistan will shift or change their policy towards Afghanistan? And what would the tendency be, since they have been accused that they have been supporting terrorist groups, including the Taliban on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border? What is your opinion?
See, the Taliban historically were in very friendly term with Pakistan, and we must understand why they are very prone to or tilt toward Pakistan. The key reason is when the Taliban were first, the Taliban movement took place in Afghanistan by the people who studied in Pakistani madrasas, the Taliban. The Taliban means the students of the madrasa are students in general. So their families were there. They had close connection with the culture, and environment of Pakistan. And when they came to, wage, fight against the U.S., their families were still there, and they had no place in Afghanistan. The Afghan governments would took on them, and they would push them from Afghanistan, and where the only place that they had were Pakistan. So they were kind of, very close to Pakistan, and most of the Taliban who were getting hurt, they would be transferred to hospital in Pakistan. And the Pakistani government also played a double role. We must acknowledge that. From one hand, they would be saying that, well, they cooperate with the government of Afghanistan, but at the same time, they would, at least keep silent on the Taliban presence in Afghanistan. So they were in some ways supporting the Taliban. And now that the Taliban, gained power in Kabul, the Pakistani government is very happy because naturally they have good relationship with them, and they say that we will have more influence in Afghanistan. We can have more, benefit from the Taliban regime by giving them access to Central Asian countries, so that the Pakistani government have can better trade relationship with them. So they kind of sort of see the Taliban is a very friendly government toward them, and it of course benefit them.
Okay, I think it's quite clear about this particular question. And other one is like sometimes people they asking the question. I will try translate to you. Like they're
Sure.
talking about the war between the American war in Afghanistan to deal to deal with the Taliban in 2001. Like, and they just ask like, what is the responsibility for the U.S. after they withdraw from Afghanistan? And they say like they destroy a lot of things in Afghanistan, like economics and like many life of the people in Afghanistan. So he just tried to argue what we can see responsibility from the U.S. and like why U.S. Uh, like take a war only in Afghanistan, even though like in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, or many Islamic country they also implement the Sharia law. Why it's only Afghanistan? Yeah.
You know, the best answer to this question is, that might is right. When you have power, you can do everything. Unfortunately, Afghanistan is one of the weakest state. Even though, the perpetrator of 9/11 was Arab and kind of people from other nationalities, none of them were from Afghanistan. And it is the and this only fact that Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan cannot justify the 20-year war in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan, just because of one person suffer so much, it really cannot justify that fact. So Afghanistan was really a weak state, right? So the US could not invade maybe Saudi Arabia because it has very good relationship with them in terms of trade. The US could not invade Pakistan because it was also challenging for them. And so are the other countries. Afghanistan was weak state, and it has many other advantages. For the U.S. Is a strategic place in the region. So they invaded Afghanistan, and I think Sharia. It is really what Islam say can pose no threat to any government. Governments can peacefully coexist. If communism back which was strong and the Russia in 1980s and the US could coexist, why cannot these countries coexist? But the problem is much more than Sharia government. US wants to instill and export its democracy to every place, and it was in their strategy, our master strategy, I would say. So to go to Afghanistan, install democracy there, and then go to Iraq, install democracy there, because after the Cold War, the only threats that the United States could see was China and the Islamist government, because Russia was no more a threat. So what the U.S. grand strategy said was that we must engage with China economically, because they could not fight with China militarily. So that China does not become a threat to the US. They establish very close ties with China in terms of economic, and now they cannot separate from each other. But China benefited from that a lot, and now the US regret that we made China even stronger, because now their separation is very difficult. And they said, okay, so this is the solution for China, and the solution for Islamist country is to go install democracies there. But unfortunately, the Western style are copy pasting of those democracies, and Afghanistan did not work. In in terms of responsibilities, I think the US has a lot of responsibilities, and to help Afghan people, because all what happened was because of the US miscalculation. They miscalculated the strategic advantages of going to Afghanistan, and all of these things are happening because of, mostly because of them. So they should support Afghans in every aspect of the life these days.
Okay, it's very clear, and I quite agree with you. And the other question is also from Thai people. I will try to translate to you. Like when we're talking about the human rights issue in Afghanistan, mostly it linked to like the refugees and the Taliban. She tried to asking you about like how the South Asian region position about this particular issue. I mean, the South Asian country position about this particular issue in Afghanistan, and how like the South Asian country can come to help or support the new Afghan government to resolve this particular problem.
Uh, well, human right issue, I think, is responsibility not of one country, but of all countries or people on the planet, and we shall support every person who is suffering. And in terms of the Afghanistan neighboring regions such as South Asia, these days what they can do is to advocate to its government, to increase or at least start humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, because people are suffering, and human right is not always violated by people or governments. When you have poverty, you have serious threat to your human rights, because people will rape a woman, in war, and people will steal, and they will go to theft because they will have no food, right? So when there is conflict, human rights can be violated. When there is poverty, human rights can be violated. So all these things, bring or have impact on human rights. So the only solution, or the only thing that can help Afghans prevent human right abuses, to start humanitarian aid to them, and telling their governments, to act objectively. If the Taliban are the enemies of the US, it does not mean that they should be our enemy. They have their own problem with them, and mostly it is political. And we shall, stick to humanitarian grounds. We shall think about not only the Taliban, but the people who are under the Taliban now, because the Taliban now control more than 34 million Afghans, who are the entire population of Afghans. And through them is the road to prosperity. If the government is stable, it means the Afghan people are stable. So every effort which can make the Afghan government stable and accountable should be made, so that Afghan people can see prosperity.
Mm, yeah, thank you so much. And for the next question, I just want to asking about the position of India, because like it's very long time since the Taliban come to power, and uh, India have like some the policy about waste and what. But nowadays, like after the meeting in Russia, India is quite like proactive on talking about the humanitarian fund for the Afghanistan people, right? And before that, before the Modi, Mr. Modi talking about this particular thing, I just read the news that the Afghan government talking about the rethinking about the Tapti or the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, like Pakistan, India gas pipeline. Do you think this particular thing is linking together about the interest of the Indian? So after that, the Indian government just think, oh, it's our interest, so we have to act something to help the Afghan, and we cannot lose this particular gas pipeline to other country. Do you think it linking it about the
Exactly.
issue? And
India has a huge stake in Afghanistan, and if it ignore Afghanistan, the rival states such as Pakistan can come forward and fill the gap. And India do not want that. What India is doing, previously they kind of kept the Taliban away from being engaged with them, but right now India has adopted more a pragmatic approach. India now see that the Taliban is a reality, and if India has to keep its interest in Afghanistan, they must engage with whoever are in power in Kabul, and now it is the Taliban. Of course, India can also have its strong interest. It's not only because of its security vis-a-vis Pakistan, but also because of its economic interest. India has spent, I think, billions of dollars in Afghanistan, and to keep that investment safe, or at least visible, India should actively engage with the Taliban. And of course, their access to Central Asian countries can also benefit India. And more than that, if there's instability in Afghanistan, India can suffer because when there were war in Afghanistan in 1990s, there were many training camps established, by maybe people in Pakistan or whoever on the side of in Afghanistan. They would get trained and they would send them back to fight in Kashmir. So the issue of Afghanistan has direct impact on issue of Kashmir, India's interest in general and in particular on trade and security. So India must keep up, its promise to the people of Afghanistan by constructively engaging with the Taliban.
Yeah. And for other question from the Facebook, they ask that like, what do you think are the biggest problem for the U.S. For their state building effort in Afghanistan when they come in the power since 2001? And what is the problem of them
So
on the
there
state
were
building?
the I think the biggest problem was security because they were not able uh, to at least implement policies properly which they wanted. So this was the first problem, security situation. Second problem, Afghanistan. The U.S. did not come to Afghanistan to for state building. They just even the President Biden said that we were not there for nation building. Their objective was to uh, revenge the perpetrator of the 9/11. So US did not really dedicated its effort to state building or nation building, even though they did some work there which is quite visible. But other than that, of course, the corrupt government, the money which was flown for nation building to Afghans and foreign, contractors, including the U.S. contractors. So all of them, would hide more than half of the money, and very small amount of the money would be allocated to nation building. So corruption, security situation, the U.S. intention, to prioritize the security and not nation building were some of the key issues to state buildings.
Okay. For the next question, uh, she asked that like, do you think Shanghai Cooperation Organization will fill the vacuum in the Afghanistan?
Potentially, yes, it has huge potential, because most strong economies in Asia are in that group. Right now, Afghanistan is in observer state there and not, as a active member. And the Taliban are actively looking for, potential partners. Previously, for the Afghan government, it was the U.S. And if the U.S., ignored the Taliban, in terms of aid, the Taliban has already showed its interest to China especially to come forward and invest in Afghanistan. So yes, Shanghai Corporation can potentially replace US in Afghanistan, but it has their own flaws which need a lot of discussion to be addressed.
And for the next question, I just want to know that in your opinions, how long this interim government will long for the to govern Afghanistan, and what will be the new architecture of the Afghanistan regime in the future? It will be the democracy, multiple party system, or anything else in your opinions?
It's sorry, it's very difficult, I think, to predict right now, and it's very difficult to question to answer. But in my opinion, it all depends how the Taliban unfold its regime in Afghanistan, how the Taliban rule the people of Afghanistan, and what is the response of international community to the Taliban. If international community do not provide aid to Afghanistan, Afghanistan can become even worse there, and it can affect the Taliban leadership. There can be more conflicts there, and the conflict can go long and long and long, and it can lead to so many other problems. But if the things come to be happen, this is the second scenario. If international community recognize the Taliban, if they resume their foreign aid, things will come to normal. I am very optimistic about the future of Afghanistan if international community cooperate with the Taliban, because the Taliban, they are human with time, and especially with this era of globalization, social media, it put a lot of pressure on the Taliban, to respect what Afghan people want. And gradually they will become more moderate. And eventually they will also introduce some form of, not democracy, I would say, but some form of election. They will establish a council which will have its own, procedure and mechanism how to elect the state of head. And Afghan people will have more, political freedom. So the more prosperous the Afghan government is, the stronger are the possibility for the legitimacy of that government.
Okay. And for I think we take a lot of time. And for the last question for you is like, what that is means about the situation in Afghanistan now, is meaning for the geopolitical in like in Asia. What will be in the next or future of our Asian century or something like that? What the change in Afghanistan affect these particular things?
See, Afghanistan has always played, a key role in shaping the geopolitics of the region and the world as a whole. Security is the most important thing. If Afghanistan is, unstable, if there is a security threat, especially if now it is ISIS, is the Taliban restricted their agenda to Afghanistan only, but ISIS, they want to expand its global caliphate. And if they become strong in Afghanistan, they will gradually move to Pakistan. And of course, India, which has also a lot of, Muslim population, and Bangladesh, of course, to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. So gradually things can become worse and worse if the ISIS gain a strong, foot in Afghanistan. Second, if there is catastrophe and these things continues in Afghanistan, refugee crisis will be there. And with refugee crisis, you can also have security problem. So, and by that the region can be affected. There is also a, power up a real politic, for example, between India and Pakistan. They can also, come and clash with each other if things are bad, and if there is no, a healthy balance and political vacuum in Afghanistan. So these can countries can also become, more chilly with each other. And for China and the US and Russia, it is another problem, because there are some, reports that China is expanding its influence in Afghanistan, and and the US is not happy with that. And US can, respond to that through whatever means possible, because they do not want China is a strategic, are the most influential actor in Afghanistan, because US said they did invest in Afghanistan a lot, and we do not want China to build on that resources. So, it has always impact on the region. Suffer with your mute, I think.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ifran. On behalf of the South Asian 10 and Thailand Political Database Research Center, I am very thank you that you come and give a very important speech and important and give many information for us the Thai people who like very interested in Afghanistan in this particular country. And it's a very good thing that we heard from the Afghan people that what happened and what is the challenge from for the Taliban. And yeah, and we are like very long time have not met since we study in
Yeah,
India, and I'm very happy to meet you again in the online platform. And I hope that in the future we can cooperate or have some special talk like this in the future too. Yeah.
we will
Thank you
definitely.
very
Thank
much.
you. It was really great to speak to you, Superweight. Take care and have a great day. And thanks to the audience.
Yeah,
Ciao,
thank
ciao.
you so much.
Bye bye.